On a stifling summer night, the wind seemed incapable of penetrating the thick walls of the ancient city. In its winding corridors, where shadows intertwined in an almost dreamlike fashion, STF walked quickly, as if an unseen weight propelled her. Her hands were sweating, and her stomach churned with a mixture of fear and curiosity. The city had never been kind to its inhabitants, always imposing an indescribable claustrophobia, as if time were a slow poison corroding the foundations of the world. But that night, something even stranger was about to happen. STF, a young astrophysicist, was the last to leave the research center that rose like a fortress of concrete and glass. A secret project that had consumed months of her life. The night marked a revelation, one that would change humanity's destiny forever. The laboratory lights were dim, staining the walls a greenish hue. The cosmic instrument, as it was called, stood before her, on a polished metal pedestal. Its form was unique, something metallic, yet with an organic texture, almost pulsating. It wasn't just technology. It seemed like something from another world, from a dimension STF barely understood. Her mentor, Dr. Adler, was the first to touch it. He spoke of infinite benefits for humanity, of rewriting the rules of life and death. But STF harbored deep doubts about the true objectives of the research. The project began by seeking new energy sources to combat global scarcity, but recent discoveries about the artifact's nature made her question what they were creating. When Dr. Adler explained the device's true purpose, his words were enigmatic. It is an artifact that transcends known physics. It can shape not only reality, but destiny itself. The implications were dangerous. The idea of manipulating destiny, altering events in the timeline, caused discomfort in STF. Who would have this power? How would it be used? And the most disturbing question, should humanity even attempt to control something so vast and incomprehensible? This uncertainty gnawed at her as she approached the object. The laboratory seemed empty, but STF couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The air grew thick, as if distorted by the instrument's touch. She hesitated. The idea that her hands could unleash something beyond human comprehension made her tremble. But, upon thinking of the lives that could be saved and the disasters averted, she decided not to retreat. With precise movements, she touched the device's surface. Immediately, brilliant symbols erupted around it, flooding the environment with a light that seemed to come from beyond the stars. Time slowed as she connected to something alive, an entity manifesting through the object. A chilling cold enveloped her, and she felt something non-human, beyond understanding, observing her. The artifact began to vibrate, and a pressure surged into her mind, like distant voices trying to communicate. "You don't know what you're doing," one of them whispered. STF tried to concentrate, but the words seemed distorted, as if reality was tearing them apart. The light became blinding, forcing her to close her eyes. When she opened them, the laboratory had vanished. She stood in an infinite field, beneath a black, empty sky. A silence hung heavy, as if the universe held its breath. Her body was unresponsive. The feeling of being a mere spectator terrified her. She tried to scream, but no sound emerged. Reality contorted around the instrument, alive and conscious. It was like being dragged into another dimension, where space-time and consciousness merged. Faceless silhouettes emerged, moving in impossible ways. A chilling panic consumed her. The ground fractured like glass, and she was pulled into an abyss. Before losing control, one final image appeared, Dr. Adler, with a disturbing smile, looking directly at her. His smile was strange, as if he knew something STF didn't understand. He seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once, a presence beyond the physical body. The vision of Dr. Adler blurred, and STF felt dizzy, as if her being was being sucked into his consciousness. She tried to pull away, but her feet didn't touch the ground. She floated without reference, lost in jumbled thoughts. The cosmic instrument had done something to her, something beyond comprehension. The laws of physics, the rules of reality, all crumbled around her, as if space-time were dissolving. It was like being pulled into the center of a vortex, where identity and consciousness dissolved into chaos. "You cannot escape," whispered a voice, not Adler's, but from nowhere, as if the void spoke. STF couldn't distinguish the real from the unreal. Fear consumed her, a sense of powerlessness before the uncontrollable. She was between worlds, between what was and what could have been. In the distance, symbols floated in the darkness, like fragments of an ancient code. They pulsed, changed shape and color, intertwining in meaningless yet familiar patterns. She tried to focus on them, searching for an escape. As she approached, shadowy forms emerged. Long and distorted, they took shape as almost human beings. Their bodies were fragmented, as if the very idea of a body was distorted. Faces morphed, mixing despair and emptiness. STF didn't know if they were victims like her or something older. Her breath hitched, suffocation took hold. She tried to scream, but her voice vanished. An unbearable pain grew in her chest, as if her body was being ripped apart. Her mind was bombarded with disconnected images. Dr. Adler reappeared closer, distorted by the mist. He didn't speak, but his eyes shone with an unobtainable knowledge. He seemed to be the cause and the result of everything, a primordial force without ethics or morality. Despair overwhelmed STF. She felt herself being dragged away from her own existence. The artifact, which promised freedom, now imprisoned her in a prison without walls. She knew she couldn't escape alone. Something greater, beyond human comprehension, was at stake. An explosive light consumed her, crushing her mind. Space disintegrated, forms shattered. When the light faded, STF was back in the laboratory. But something had changed. The air felt heavy, the walls pulsed. The device seemed to observe her with a strange gaze. Dr. Adler was there, silent. What he had unleashed was incomprehensible. STF knew that humanity's destiny was sealed. The instrument had altered history in an unpredictable way. The future was unknowable. She tried to walk, but her legs felt heavy. The air was thick, as if something held her captive. Looking at Adler, she saw a smile of understanding, not of pleasure. She then understood that the artifact not only altered reality, but also those who used it. They were molded, transformed in unintelligible ways. Her future, Adler's, and everyone connected to the power was unknown. Human destiny was now out of control. STF felt the weight of what had happened settle in her mind. Time wasn't flowing as it should, and the reality around her continued to distort, as if the fabric of the universe had torn for a moment and was now slowly stitching itself back together. She looked at Dr. Adler, standing before her, motionless, but with a gaze laden with a difficult-to-understand weight. There was a terrifying calmness in his face, as if he were waiting for something. STF didn't know what to do, how to react, but she knew she could no longer trust her own perception. The instrument, which seemed a key to endless power, had now become a prison. A prison without walls that expanded to swallow not only the body, but the soul. The silence was complete, but STF knew something was about to happen. The air around her was tense, compressed, as if something enormous and invisible was about to break the barrier between them and the unknown. The shadows in the laboratory, previously lifeless, now stirred slightly, as if they had a will of their own. STF tried to move away, but her legs felt heavy, as if each step required a gigantic effort. She felt pulled by something greater, something she didn't understand. Fear was now a constant presence, a shadow that consumed her thoughts. Dr. Adler didn't move, but STF noticed something changing within him. He was no longer just a man. He was transforming into something else. His form trembled, his features blurred, too fast to follow. It wasn't just his physical appearance, but something deeper that touched the essence of his existence. STF knew he had been affected by the instrument's power in an irreversible way. And somehow, she had been too. She tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come out. Words were still words, but they vanished before leaving her mouth. The shadows around her grew more intense, taking on grotesque and abstract forms. It was as if reality was crumbling before her. She felt a pain so intense and profound that it seemed to tear her flesh. But she couldn't scream, couldn't move, trapped in an endless nightmare. Dr. Adler broke the silence, but his voice didn't sound human. He spoke in an ancient, unknown language, but one that STF felt was familiar. She didn't understand the words, but something within her responded. Something awakened, something she didn't want to know, but could no longer ignore. The artifact, created to expand human knowledge, now brought something STF couldn't comprehend. She looked at the device, which seemed more alive and imposing. It was as if it were observing her, as if it had a will of its own. An overwhelming force emanated from it, something impossible to contain. She knew there was no turning back. What the instrument had unleashed could not be put back. The shadowy figures approached, their faces contorted in suffering. They were no longer lifeless figures, but part of something greater, beyond human limitations. STF was being drawn into a force greater than anything she had ever known. Dr. Adler drew closer, his eyes shining with supernatural intensity. He no longer seemed human, but a manifestation of something ancient and profound. STF felt dizzy, as if falling into an abyss. She tried to fight, to understand, but only felt the weight of an inevitable destiny. "You cannot escape anymore," Adler said, his voice distorted, as if coming from elsewhere. "The instrument has done what it had to do. Now there is no turning back." The shadows enveloped her, icy. STF didn't know what was happening, but what she witnessed had no explanation. The artifact had changed reality in incomprehensible ways. She was now part of it, not a spectator, but a participant. Humanity's future intertwined with beings from other worlds. The laboratory, once a place of discovery, became a distorted space, outside of time and logic. STF no longer knew who she was. Her humanity was dissolving, consumed by the instrument. A final wave of pain, a moment of clarity, and then total darkness. The artifact was no longer a key to power. It was the end of everything she knew. Humanity's destiny had changed forever. There was no escape. The world they knew no longer existed. And what came next? No one could understand.